Afternoon, guys. I have to add a disclaimer right at the beginning. I'm not a geologist. I come from a biological background, but I got a bursary from the Department of Water and Forestry at Water Affairs and Forestry at that time in 2008, and I joined their groundwater section after finishing a master's in environmental management. And I was there about 3 months, went on my first field trip, got drenched with the nice soft rain from the Western Cape, and then a pipe burst when we were sampling water. So I had a proper baptism into the field. And so just a bit of an overview. Sorry, it's running away from me. I'm going to look a little bit at the definition. Then I'm going to give you a bit of a background. Talking to you about a little bit about the different fields in hydrogeology, and talk a little bit about the importance of groundwater, where you can study it, and some of the professional bodies. And then I'm going to end up with a bit of my own professional experience. Hydrogeology or geohydrology or groundwater hydrology is the study of groundwater. And just like minerals, it occurs below ground, but according to the definition of mineralogy, it's not a mineral. Of minerals, it's not a mineral. So it doesn't fall under the same legislation as minerals. It deals a lot with recharge, that is the water infiltrating after rainfall into the ground, reaching the water table, the flow below ground, the interaction with the surrounding rocks and soil, the geology and part, and then discharge. And because we can't see below ground, we often make use of things like geophysics. And there I've got a nice geophysics profile near Darling area. Lots of nice colors. Sorry, I can't interpret it because I didn't work with it at the Department of Water Affairs. I'm getting confused because it had 3 different names while I was working there. It's now Department of Water and Sanitation. The other picture that you have there on the bottom left gives you a bit of a 3D, a 2-dimensional look underground in some cases. So you work with the water table. That's where your saturated zone is found. And above that, the soil is unsaturated. Then you've got your unconfined aquifer. That's the one that's open to the air. And your confined aquifer is often below what we call an aquitard or an aquiclude that either slows down the flow into the ground or stops it completely. Now, a little bit about my background. I was born in Johannesburg, but I grew up in Bloemfontein, on the small holdings around Bloemfontein till I was about 14. So I had a lot of exposure to wind pumps and dompelpompen and things like that growing up, because most of our places where we stayed, that's the way we got water. And yes, I even used candles and things. And just like later, I come from a big family. I'm number 2 of 5, not quite 6, but we're close by, close to that. So my first encounters with groundwater as a subject field was with a friend from church that was studying groundwater, and I thought, that's a weird field. And as part of my master's in environmental management, we did a little bit of a section on groundwater. And it was interesting, but still didn't got me excited. I was still very much into my biological fields at that stage. And then I got to the bursary from the department. And after that very nice water baptism, I started finding out whether I can just go to the University of the Free State at the Institute of Groundwater Studies, just to learn more about groundwater, because I was sitting in the office looking at data and things, and I didn't understand what I was looking at. So I started working as a hydrogeologist when I joined the Learning Academy. 5 years later, after my contract ended in 2013, I got a permanent appointment, and I worked there till end of September 2019. At the moment, I'm a postdoc researcher at the Free State University at the Center of Environmental Management. So the different fields. I already mentioned geophysics. Then there's the exploration, the drilling side. We have to do borehole logs and yield testing and things like that to find out, is it economically viable to develop this borehole? The one that I did a lot of while I was working at the Department of Water and Sanitation was the monitoring side. And then there's modeling for those that like computer programs. I did a course in modeling for my master's in geology, but I never really mastered the subject. I can't really do modeling. Some people prefer to sit behind the computer doing the modeling. I prefer to be in the field. Then there's another specialist field, is hydrogeochemistry. That's where you look at how the quality of the water from infiltration after it fell on the ground, how it changes through this flow path till it gets discharged. Linked to the hydrogeochemistry is contamination. Things like all the hydrocarbons in the soil from at least 3 filling stations in Beaufort West, things like that. That's the kind of things you look at. Then there's the ecohydrology, where you look at the link between your ecosystems and your groundwater. And that's where groundwater dependent ecosystems comes in. And for me, one of my big things is awareness and capacity building. I did quite a bit of awareness around groundwater during my time at the department, and then also helped with capacity building with students, taking them to the field, giving them exposure to some of the things we were working with. And I'm still trying to do that as much as possible. In South Africa, our surface water resources, in some cases, are already fully allocated, some not quite allocated, but there's not a lot left to allocate. And then in some catchments, it's totally over allocated. So this is where the importance of groundwater comes in. It's possible to use that to augment that supply, but there's some little towns, like the little town I visited last week, Deelsville, that's totally dependent on groundwater. There's no rivers close by. They need to make use of groundwater. Groundwater is available almost everywhere. There's just some formations that's not very good at releasing the groundwater it's storing. And it means that it can be used or not. The use of groundwater is mostly for irrigation agriculture, sometimes for stock watering, and then there's, like the little towns that I mentioned, and rural communities that's totally dependent on groundwater. Just an interesting fact, groundwater is the biggest volume of fresh water in liquid form, and the documents that I looked at said it's about 79% of the fresh water in liquid form. places that you can study. Institute of Groundwater Studies at the Free State University is one of the most recognized or well-known ones, but you can study groundwater related subjects in almost all universities in South Africa. I mentioned just a few here on the slide, there's a few more. The emphasis of each of the universities might be slightly different. I know University of Pretoria is more into the unsaturated zone and engineering geology, but you'll find that you might find that the area of groundwater that you're interested in will be covered by whichever university that you're choosing to study at. IGS, unfortunately, I think take about 50 students per year, and it means that it's not a lot of students that can be accommodated. Your professional bodies. In South Africa, we've got the Groundwater Division of the GSSA, so we're connected. There's the URL if you want to go and visit it. We are having a groundwater conference in October, so you might find some information on the conference on that website. And then you've got the International Association of Hydrogeologists that brings together people from all over the world. And we've been chosen to host the 2023 conference in Cape Town for the IIH. So it's possible for you to get more information on that. Just on the photographs on the slide, the one photograph on the left shows a poster session at our 2017 conference that we held at Spear in the Western Cape. And our current chair for the Groundwater Division is the one on the right-hand side. He did some monitoring with me. I'm currently the vice chair for the Groundwater Division. My own experience. I was fortunate to work in the beautiful Burke River Valley. And that's just a quick picture for you to show some of it, what it looks like. So I worked from Gordons Bay on the southern side up to Dwarskersbos along the western coast. And I did a lot of monitoring. That meant taking of water levels, taking water samples, field readings, and sending it off for chemical analysis. Then I had to do a bit of assessment of the data, write reports on that data and a few other things. I did comments, specialist comments on groundwater use licenses. I had to report non-compliance, and if there was pollution incidents, I had to recommend a way forward, working with the Department of Environmental Affairs and Development Planning from the Western Cape government. So it was varied work, but I didn't do a lot of exploration, geophysics, pumping tests, things like that. And that's the kind of things that I realized is a bit of a gap in my experience, but there's enough people around that can give you experience in that field. But working for the department was actually very interesting. When I left the department, I took the time to finish my PhD, and I'm currently working on a couple of international projects. We finished one end of last year doing groundwater mapping for Lady Smith in KZN. The next project is looking at groundwater mapping and a management plan for the water resources for Saldanha Bay Municipality. And then looking at guidelines on how to use the Danish groundwater mapping system, change it for our conditions, so that we have a more uniform way of doing groundwater assessment and mapping in South Africa. There's just a few pictures of monitoring. On the right is a rain gauge. It's a cumulative rain gauge. So you can have the readings of the rainfall measured with an instrument. And then you can also take a sample for analysis, especially for isotopes, because the isotopes is also used to calculate recharge to the groundwater. Then the one on the top right is a friend of mine doing water level readings. It's working on the basis of the fact that the salts in the water conduct electricity. And you use an instrument called a dip meter that has either an ammeter or a beeper that tells you when the water, the end is in the water. And based on that, you can determine the depth of the water level. And then, of course, there's the sampling. At the top in the middle is two of my colleagues. One of them taught me almost everything I knew about groundwater monitoring, even though we only had metric. And the other guy was someone I had to train. He's still at the department doing very good work. The next photograph with the pump is just to show you that I can pull up the pump. But I must tell you that pump it's not a big pump, but the pump and the pipe with water in gets very heavy, especially when it's went down to about 80 meters. And the photograph in the right-hand side at the bottom actually shows you some of the what happens if you drill a borehole into a confined system. You get the water overflowing out of the borehole. This borehole was drilled in the early 1970s. And then, of course, the next thing is the assessment of the data. I plotted quite a number of water level graphs. That's the one on your on the left-hand side. And this one is to compare water levels from two different aquifers. The green curve is showing a borehole where abstraction is taking place, and the others is showing the effect of that abstraction in a neighboring aquifer. You can also portray your water levels as iso lines, contour lines, like on the top right. And on bottom left is one of the ways of showing water quality, your hydrogeochemistry. And there's a way to interpret this Piper diagram. I'm not going to go into the details, but it's actually quite interesting when you start looking into the information. Then we did quite a bit of Hydrosenses work. This was a bit of Hydrosenses work around Franschhoek. And you get boreholes in all kinds of conditions and settings. One of them was in a horse paddy. Some of them are in pump houses, and some of them are just in the open. Some of the places you do Hydrosenses work is actually quite beautiful. I recently did Hydrosenses in Deelsville. That's why I know about it. And it's very flat with lots of salt pans, but it makes it very interesting to do the work. I mentioned that one of my things that I like to do is groundwater awareness. I did it as part of the department and as part of the groundwater division. And then I started putting together a bit of a booklet for children at school. And my friend at the groundwater division actually went and made a very nice front page, and that's the one that you see on the right-hand side of the screen. This was a couple of schools that we visited for World Water Day a number of years back at the department, and you can see all the little groups of children. And at one of the schools, we could actually go and visit the borehole that provide the water to the school. This is in the Clan William area. And it's actually interesting for the kids to then learn about where their water comes from and how to protect it and things like that. And that brings me to the end of my talk.